Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jay Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today, my guest is John Michell. John is a serial entrepreneur and has created the top application in the world for the top book in the world on success, Think and Grow Rich. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with John about how you can apply the science of success to leverage yourself. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CRE PN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, John. Welcome to CRE PN Radio.
Darren, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. But before we get into it, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Well, basically, when I turned 50, I just wasn't as successful as I thought I should be. And I started out as a CPA, became a entrepreneur when I was 30, actually in the real estate development business. And then over the next 20 years was in like 6 or 7 businesses. But when I turned 50, I just wasn't as successful as I thought I should be. And I had 2 goals in my life. One was to make enough money so I didn't have to work, so I could have freedom. And the other was to find the woman of my dreams. And so at 50, I was falling short on both. And on the money, I always did okay. I made a couple $100,000 a year, but never close to netting 7 figures a year. And, when I turned 50, Darren, I just did the math. I'm like, I can't have the exceptional life unless I net 7 figures a year. As materialistic as that sounds, that was what I realized, and really is all about getting freedom. And then on the girl, at 50, I'd never been married. Although I got to say, I did a lot of interviewing. My friends may call it begging, but I like to call it interviewing. But at 50, I'm like, well, how am I going to change this 20-year history of low 6 figures a year? And so I contemplate that, and probably 3 months after I turned 50, a pearl of wisdom comes to me one night. Find the top book in the world on success and apply that book literally word for word to my life. So I'm like, pretty good idea. So I immediately go to my computer, start doing the research, and I find out that there's one book that's been read by 100 million people, and the next best-selling book on success has been read by less than 10 million people. And that book is Think and Grow Rich. I assume you probably read it, right?
Yeah, in fact, it's funny, knowing we were going to be talking, I pulled out my weathered copy there and realized it is a really good book, and I need to get back into it there. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm like, well, here we go. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And so I'm like a heat-seeking missile. I go to the bookstore the next day and buy the book and immerse myself in the book. And Darren, then I see the problem. In the book, he says right at the start, he says there's a secret for success, but I'm only going to give you half of the secret. He's saying it's on the reader to figure out the other half. Well, I'm like, I'm disappointed, and I need the full secret. And I mope around for probably 3 weeks, and then one day I just get up and go, come on, just man up and figure out the full secret. And so over the next 2 months, I go back and reread the book, just immerse myself in the book. And what emerges is I figure out the full secret and a 12-minute a day technique to apply it. And quickly, my income starts doubling in a new business I was starting in the reverse mortgage business, to the point where, like 4 years later, I was netting $5 million a year. which was 25 times more than I'd ever made before. And of course, Darren, I felt so blessed. And what was really cool is I could see why it was happening. I was just playing the game of being an entrepreneur at a much higher level than I ever had before. I mean, it worked because I was focused only on what moves the needle. I tripled my discipline so I could do the key habits I couldn't do before. And I had just new ideas coming into my head consistently every week. And, I just became fascinated by the fact that you could take two key scientific principles and apply them to your life and so materially impact your success. And so, to wrap this up, I decided I wanted to share this with the world. And so I sold my company. And probably a couple of months after I sold the company, I met the former chancellor and president at the University of Texas. And he says, "Hey, you got to teach this at the University of Texas. And why don't we teach it together?" And so that's what I do. That's my sidelight. Really the joy of my life today is taking this 12-minute a day technique and teaching it to driven entrepreneurs. And I do this with my great partner, Kelly Hatfield. And our sole goal is to take them to netting 7 figures a year.
No, I love it. I love it. I love the fact we're talking about this here at the beginning of the year too.
Right.
It seems appropriate. People are often setting goals or trying to do more than they did last year, and there's a lot of energy in the first week, and then a little less in the second week, and then about the fourth week it's back down to about where it was at the end of last year. So I'm curious. This is really. I mean, you've got at least an audience of one that is really dialed into what you're saying. And I'm curious. You said 3 things: kind of focus, discipline, and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the focus part, and I get the discipline part, and the ideas thing to me almost sounds like more distractions that would keep me from doing that. So I'd love to hear more about, how it is that because obviously
Right.
you were successful before this,
Right.
but really dialing in.
Relatively.
Well, but I mean, across the spectrum of, income earners in the U.S., you go back 10 years and a couple $100,000, you're not slumming
Right.
at that
Right.
point.
Right.
But clearly you recognize there was more in the tank, and you had more. You could do much more, as opposed to just be content with a couple $100,000. So I would love to hear you kind of dial in and share with the listeners kind of more as how what was it that you really that propelled you.
Well, let me give you a little more, I guess, foundation to Think and Grow Rich, because that'll explain it a little better, I think. Think and Grow Rich talks about applying the science of the human mind to leverage yourself, which is on surface pretty interesting, and it's based on one central idea that 95% of your daily actions are unconscious. And, I know in this world we live in, Darren, that we hear facts and figures and you don't know necessarily what to believe. But, learning that 95% of my daily actions are unconscious was probably the most profound thing I ever learned. Because once I got that, I saw that to have a higher level of success than I was currently having, I had to influence those unconscious daily actions. I mean, it's pure math, right? And you do that by proactively influencing the subconscious mind. And that's, as we get into this, you'll see where those ideas were coming from. When you proactively influence the subconscious mind, ideas come into your head that aren't coming in now. Does that make sense?
No, totally. So you read the book, you uncover and that's pretty powerful right there, that 95% of your your day is spent unconscious. I mean, it's
Right.
pretty scary to think of it, that it's that high. I was hoping for under 90, but upon reflection, 95 is probably about right.
Well,
Um,
I'm glad you caught that like you did, because when I work with clients, I make them Google it. It's interesting. If you Google what percentage of my daily actions are unconscious, in big dark letters, it'll say 95%. And if somebody gets that, then all the rest of my stuff, they're like, oh, wow, okay, here we go. But if they don't get that, it's all just clutter. And so I like that you really got that.
well, and I think even in this age, with the internet and all of the social media platforms, whether you are a observer or you're creating content, I mean, it's just amazing we're able to get anything done sometimes when I realize that just all of the messaging that comes at us, tenfold all day, every day. And everybody's got some sort of an agenda with that, trying
Right.
to distract you from what you're trying to get done. And so, yeah, I get it.
Well, and let me dig into that just a little deeper, and you'll appreciate how this really works. We all have a fundamental problem we have to overcome. And that problem is that we're fundamentally wired for survival, not for success, but we're wired for survival. And again, 95% of your daily actions are unconscious. And so what that really means is when you open your eyes each morning, you're on autopilot most of the day, and you're innately wired to be fear-based, reactive, and negative. Well, that's exactly the opposite of how you need to be if you want to be productive, creative, and happy. And so the only way to override that innate programming is to overlay a better programming that's programming you for success and efficiency and focus, and that's what this 12-minute day technique does.
So you said the fact we're kind of wired for survival. I mean, I get that from just a prehistoric kind of just a
Right.
reference point of like, if you're, fearful you might be eaten or,
Hmm.
whatever, you've got to somehow, um, survive the day. Uh, how, how is it that, I mean, is that basically, that's where the unconscious lies, is just that, that
Yeah.
fear based, that's where we're stuck. I mean,
Right.
is
I
that
mean, you sort of hit on it, Darren. Innately, you're going to be geared to being reactive and fear based unless you do something that overrides that. And that's why when people are going about their day, oftentimes they're basically fear based and they're reactive. They're not focused on what moves the needle. And they're not operating from confidence. And that's all because they're innately wired for survival, which worked great, millennia ago, but not so good in today's world. And so that's the power of what I'm going to share with your audience today.
So with that fear base though, if there are others out there that know that you're geared for fear, and they amplify the fear so that your
Mhm.
reception, I mean, you're receptive to the fear.
Mhm.
Is that kind of also like, force you're fighting against, or that's against you on a daily basis? Because I was just thinking
Eh,
about, most of the messaging is not happy, joy, and free. It's about scare the crap out of you kind of thing, or keep you in a fear-based place.
Darren, that's a good question, and really, it's when you learn how to use this technique to focus, you become focused only on what moves the needle, and all these distractions, all these fear things, just fall by the wayside. You're not even entertaining them. They can't even get in your head. And let me explain a little of the basic science of this, which I think you'll find interesting. Here's how the human mind works. The conscious mind sets your intention and is influenced by logic, but the subconscious mind controls your everyday actions, and it's only influenced by repetition. And the easiest way to sort of give you an example is the idea of losing weight. Um, let's say you want to lose weight. Well, the conscious mind sets the intention to lose weight, but the reality is people aren't losing weight because of lack of intention. It's from lack of influencing their daily actions, which is their exercising and eating. And so once you sort of understand that, and again, the part of the brain that is controlling your daily actions is only influenced by repetition. It doesn't care about logic at all. In fact, that part of your brain is a more primitive part of yourself that 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 repetition. That's why the repetition influences it. And so that's why this 12-minute a day technique, it gives that subconscious brain the repetition it needs to influence their daily actions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Because I just, as you were saying that, I'm kind of thinking about some of the things that I, default to that are like, why am I doing this?
Right. Well, you know
And
what?
go ahead.
Well, one thing I was going to say, uh, this is only for driven people. If you're not driven, this isn't for you. And maybe the best way to explain that is a few years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I decided if I'm going to share this with the world, I'm going to go find the top expert in the world on success, Darren Hardy. You know who Darren Hardy is?
I've heard of him, and I don't know that I'm 100% familiar with his
Well,
teachings. Or
he's arguably the top expert in the world on success, and so I figure out a way to get to him, and I spend 3 days with him, and I show him what I created, and I show him my template, my 12-minute a day technique, and he looks at it and goes, John, this is good, and then he looks at it closer and goes, this is really good, but he says, people aren't going to spend 12 minutes a day on this. And I'm like, Darren, how the heck can that be? It caused my income to go up by 25 times. Time Magazine did a cover story on the science behind it. And we're applying the central concept of the top book in the world on success. How are people not going to spend 12 friggin' minutes a day on this? And he sort of laughs and he goes, John, you're new to the success and human achievement field. He says, the dirty little secret is that most people won't do anything to impact their success and achievement in life. And he says, you only need to go find driven people because you need to find people where more success, a higher level of success, is an absolute necessity, not merely a preference. Because if it's just a preference, they just won't do it. And boy, that was so helpful to me to learn that.
no, absolutely. As opposed to the masses that you would think would be your target audience, or that anybody would
Right,
be, in the audience, but just to really focus and recognize who it is that's looking for that message,
right,
or looking for help.
right,
Um, and it is interesting because I think that while the masses uh, are suffering from some lack of, let's say that they're lacking and want something, uh, it's more in the form of a pill, or if I can buy something that, an app or a gizmo or whatever from Amazon that I can, make
right.
my life better, as opposed to the work. And in this case, you're saying 12 minutes a day. I would love to hear if you can share, something of what occurs in those 12 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Well, here's how it works. This really gets into the meat of this. So the when you read Think and Grow Rich, the half of the secret that he gives you is that everything starts with a thought. And so when I read that, I'm like, okay, I buy that, but where do I go with that? And from really immersing myself in the book, what I realized was the real full secret of Think and Grow Rich is what you envision in detail on a daily basis is what shows up in your life. Let me say that again. What you envision in detail on a daily basis is what shows up in your life. Well, what that really means is when you take your life and you step back and you create immense clarity, you're defining, here's exactly the person I want to be, here's exactly what I want to accomplish, and here's precisely how I'm going to achieve my clearly defined goals. When you create all that clarity, which is the hard part, uh, and then you feed that clarity to yourself 12 minutes a day, after about 21 days, the subconscious mind starts accepting the programming, and it starts showing up in your thoughts and actions automatically without thinking. That's really the magic. Before 21 days, it rejects it, but at more or less the 21-day point, it accepts it, and then it starts impacting your daily actions, and those enhanced, improved daily actions creates the life you dream of and you want. I mean, it's powerfully simple.
Okay, a couple things I get there. I mean, it's like the messaging to yourself, and it's like if you are playing golf and you say, "Don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water."
Right,
You
right.
basically said, "Hit it in the water, hit it in the water, hit it in the water," and
Yeah,
and boom, you're in the water.
right.
So I get that the clarity piece, and also I guess that it's the right message,
Right.
too,
Right.
as opposed to just a message. And I'm curious. The clarity piece to me seems to be the first most important thing, because if you don't have that clarity and you're messaging yourself something that's not spot on, and then you're wondering why you didn't get there.
Right.
Um, so how do you make certain? Because I mean, it seems to me with that, because I get the also kind of the repetition of the messaging and getting to your subconscious, uh and also, is this kind of like NLP, or I mean, there's other
Yes, there's
variations
NLP involved in it. Yes, absolutely.
that just the power of the subconscious, and how you can rewire your brain essentially to not default to your prior actions. But I mean, it sounds to me, because the repetition of 21 days, I know with like exercise too, if you'll do something for 21 days, you create a habit.
Right.
uh, so
Right.
that all makes sense to me. So how do you work with people, or you know clarity and goals and all that? Because I think also the other piece of this I was going to ask you is you mentioned two things when we first started. You wanted to be financially independent, um, or financially
Mm,
free, and you also wanted to find the woman of your dreams.
right.
I think sometimes, and I know in my own experience, when I've really set a goal, it almost feels like the two are mutually exclusive, meaning I'm
Right.
so focused on the one, I don't have time for the other. So I'd love to hear
Right.
uh, a little bit on those two things, on the clarity and how you share that with the rest of your life.
Right. Well, basically, as I have a template that basically breaks your life down into the five major categories: yourself, your health, your romantic relationship, your spirituality, and your career. And so on the front of the template, you're feeding sort of the ideal you in each of those areas of your life. And on the back, you're feeding the improvements in each area, and you're essentially living your life quarter by quarter. So each quarter you'll have a new goal for your career, new goal for your romantic relationship, new goal for your health, and you're defining what that goal is, the why behind the goal, and the three or four key behaviors associated with the goal, and the time frame and measurement. And on the bottom of our template, you sort of measure your performance on that. But so so you're impacting all phases of your life. I mean, uh, of course, this had such a dramatic impact on my income that's what most people at least come to me for. But I see that the biggest impact for me, I mean, the money was great, but finding a great partner to share my life with, and then being hopefully a great partner, is way more important than the money. And same with, having the discipline for my health. And so that's sort of how it works.
I like the fact that you've identified the 5 areas, because I know in the past when I've had a goal, production goal or some sort of financial goal, and I worked really hard to get to it, and at the end I feel like now I can breathe, and and what happens is that I basically let go of what got me there and backslide, uh, not realizing I've got to continue, or I didn't learn what I should have learned in that to make it
Right.
simpler, or to propel it. I had a, a dollar amount, and I got there, and then I was done. I was like, and exhausted. And I also, tell me a little bit about the importance of the quarter, the 90-day time frame, because I think that's something that I've heard, and I haven't necessarily in the times past that I've been really goal focused. I was kind of more like an annual number.
Right.
I might break it down into months, but I'm curious if you can share, what's the thinking, what's the importance of the 90-day time
Well, I
frame?
just think 90 days is way more manageable. I mean, if you focus on making every quarter great, your year is going to be great, right? And I think that's the logic of it.
No, I get it. I get it.
And one thing that we might take this a little deeper, because one of the things that I have seen is that so often people ask me today, they go, uh, so really all it took was 12 minutes a day and your income goes up by 25 times to mid 7 figures a year. Um, well, let me explain this a little deeper, and and I'll be vulnerable about sort of what I experienced. So when I was in my 30s and 40s, and I'm making, low 6 figures a year, if you'd asked me to rate myself as an entrepreneur, I probably would have rated myself an 8. But when I got into my early 50s and was on the other side of netting 7 figures a year, I'm like, whoa, I wasn't an 8. I was a 3 or 4. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And it reminds me of that great Bill Parcells quote, "You are what your record says you are." Well, my record was telling me I was a net 6 figures a year guy. And I confused being competent as an entrepreneur with really working hard. I worked harder than all my friends, and therefore I thought that I was an 8. But when I saw what really affected competence as an entrepreneur, I'm like, whoa, I am a 3 or 4. And as I started to dig into that, and I saw that competence as an entrepreneur comes down to your daily habits and your daily mindset. And so I start looking at my life in my 30s and 40s, and I see that disconnect between working so hard and not getting the big results. And I had this innate feeling that I was playing at maybe 20% of my potential. Couldn't put my finger on why that was, because I was working so hard, but I had that sense. And now in working with clients, so many of them say that. And I had that feeling that, why am I not further along with my life? That's sort of where finding a wife came in. And one of the things I didn't sort of share in my story before was when I turned 50, my mom was dying of pancreatic cancer. And I was living in Dallas at the time. And I remember going to the hospital after work every day to see her, and then going into the parking lot and just crying my eyes out, because I knew she didn't have long for this world. And it made me really dig into my life. And I saw that my mom and dad gave me such an advantage in life. They sent me to like Jesuit high school in Dallas, and they did everything they could for me. But all I was doing with my life was creating an average life. And I got to tell you, I hated the average life because I knew I was so much I could do so much better. And you know that I think that feeling I had about my life, which was accentuated by what I was seeing with my mom as she was passing, that gave me the incentive to really dig in and figure out how to play the game of life at a higher level. And one of the things I'm sort of proud of that happened is once I crossed over to netting 7 figures a year, like I said, I felt so blessed that I thought, how can I pay this back? And I created a foundation to help single moms because you know, I saw single moms have a unique place in this world, and you know, I felt so blessed that that's how initially I started giving back, and today it's with that, but also with helping fellow entrepreneurs just play this game of being an entrepreneur at a higher level.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you sharing that. Um, there is that realization as you age that there is an exit uh,
Right.
that none of us really get to plan, but trying to really focus one's life and make it meaningful as opposed to just living. I share your thoughts there. It's just it is kind of a weird thing when you get to that point as opposed to just going through the motions.
Right.
So, uh,
Well, and you know, back to sort of what I was saying though about being competent as an entrepreneur, you know, I don't think, I think most people don't really step back and evaluate it. And I saw like, as I work with clients, I call what I do mentoring plus methodology, because upping their game as an entrepreneur comes down to impacting their daily habits and impacting their mindset. And the mentoring affects the habits. The methodology affects uh, the mindset. And what I really mean by that, I give you an example of 3 habits that um, I install in every client, and there's usually more than that. But the 3 that I always see is, the first one is, so many entrepreneurs are working in their business that they're not working on their business. And one of the things I learned to do is how to just step back from my life and really think, just think, and do it 2 times a week. And this is not regular thinking, it's deep thinking. And you know, the top people in the world do this: Elon Musk, Bill Gates. And so I started this practice, and you know, quick story of one of the things that came out of this. So as I mentioned, I was in the reverse mortgage business, and so I start this practice of deep thinking twice a week. And it comes to me, I ought to be in the title business because every reverse mortgage requires a title company. So I'm like, yeah, this makes all the sense in the world. Well, that one idea ended up probably putting $6 million in my pocket from having that that habit of just thinking 2 times a week. And another habit is, so often entrepreneurs think they're growing, but they're not really growing. And boy, I suffered from this because in my 30s and 40s, I'm like, you know, I'm too busy to grow. Well, big mistake. And in my 50s, early 50s, I figured out a system for personal growth. And so in working with clients, I just give them this system where they've got the wisdom of experts coming into their head every week. And so often my team, when I implemented this in my life, they'd go, boy, it's a new idea week. Where are you getting these ideas? And but hey, they weren't my ideas. They were really the ideas of experts. But that was transformative from a habit standpoint. And then the third habit is always marketing. The marketing and the entrepreneur themselves are the two biggest factors in any business. And I see that so often entrepreneurs don't properly measure their marketing, and therefore they can't innovate the marketing. And so that's those three habits, along with a few others, are the mentoring habits that I install in somebody, and that's sort of how it works on the habit side. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. No, I get it, and appreciate you sharing that. The working, just the first one, taking time to think about,
Right,
on your business as opposed to in your business.
right,
That right there, I think is one that, just taking the time and knowing how to think. I think,
exactly.
we're
Well, and I'm going to teach here as we wrap this up in a minute. I'm going to teach you exactly how to do this because that's sort of the entry point for proactively influencing the subconscious mind. But I'm glad you picked up on that.
yeah, because I think that is the, too often, and it's so easy to be focused on the problem that's immediate, that has a solution, in an easy solution perhaps, but still it's kind of the focus as opposed to the more of the global kind of step
You're right.
back. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Well, and here's the other side of that. So we got to fix the habits. The other thing we have to fix is that daily mindset. Well, that's really the two parts to that. First, you got to focus only on what moves the needle. I mean, you can't be distracted. You got to first have the clarity of what moves the needle, and then focus on it. And then the second thing is you have to operate from a position of confidence, which is not how most entrepreneurs operate. They're, again, sort of operating from a standpoint of fear and uncertainty. And the way we fix that is in what they're feeding themselves 12 minutes a day. They're going to feed themselves, here's what my business looks like 3 years from now. And there's going to be 7 things. What the 4 or 5 milestones are to get there. Their succinct business plan, their strategy for success, the 2 or 3 things that move the needle, the linchpin issue to go to the next level, and finally, an articulation of their simple mission statement and their top 3 values. Well, you can imagine if you're feeding all that to yourself every day, what's going to come forth is confidence. And you're going to have this immense sense of control over your life. And that may be the most valuable thing, is this sense of control that you have, because that's what we all ultimately want. But when you have control, you have confidence, and it's 1,000 times better way to operate than the way most people operate today. Does that make sense?
Oh no, you got me. I mean, confidence over fear. Yeah, that's a world of difference there.
And
So
I tell you, I have people that go, well, this won't work on me. I'm like, wait a minute. This is pure science. This
yeah.
works on everyone, but that doesn't mean it's for everyone. And what I mean by that is this is hard. I'm not going to kid you. Creating the clarity is hard. Of course, I'm helping along with my partner Kelly. We help our clients do that, but it's still hard. And as we sort of work with clients, our goal is to always double the income they've made the prior year. And if we don't think we can do that, we won't even take them as a client. And but in working with people, we've got to see that they really are driven, and that they really will put in the work to create the clarity, because the 12 minutes a day is the easy part. And we even give people a money back guarantee, which makes us make sure we're selecting the right people. But that's really why it works, I believe.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate you kind of diving down into that a little bit and sharing some of the fundamentals. Hey, John, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. By day, I'm an insurance broker, and I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with their risk.
Hmm.
And there's three strategies we typically look at. We first look to see if there's a way we can avoid the risk. When that's not an option, we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And when that's not an option, then we look to see if we can transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is. It's
Right.
a risk transfer vehicle. And as such, I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. It could be their clients, investors, tenants, the news, the world, or however you would like to frame the question, and identify what you consider to be the biggest risk. And again, for clarification, while I am an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer.
Right.
So, if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, John Michell, what is the biggest risk?
I think the biggest risk is is not taking control of your life and letting life go wherever it's going to go rather than you directing your life. And I see that when I turned 50, and of course it was that pressure and what was going on with my mom, I realized, man, I got to step up and make this thing what I want it to be. I can't, it was too often in my 30s and 40s, I would push off, well, I'm going to be really successful just down the road a little bit. And when down the road a little bit never came, I'm like, whoa, I gotta step up here. And so I think that the risk is that you end up taking this precious life and not making the most out of it.
Yep. No, I like it. I take control. Um,
Right.
the
Why don't we share with your clients what we were talking about with this idea of setting aside time to think, because that's something really practical, I think, that would be valuable that they could get from this. Is it, you good with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So again, here's the idea. You're going to set aside time to just think 2 times a week. And so the first thing is you decide when you're going to do it. Like I do it on Wednesday mornings, and Sunday mornings. Then you figure out where are you going to do it. Okay, if your favorite place in your house or in nature. And then here's how it actually works. And each thinking session will be about 30 minutes, and you have your thinking tablet, which is basically a nice leather binder with blank sheets of paper in it. And there's three parts to it once you start the thinking. And again, the thinking sessions take about 30 minutes. First part is just just take in whatever's coming. Just whatever comes into your head in the first 10 minutes, just scribble out whatever that is. Then the second part, after you've sort of gotten all what's easily coming out, figure out a question to ask yourself, because when you ask yourself a question, it changes the dynamics of what's going on in your brain. And so you figure out the question, and you always start it with how might I this, or how might I that. And my friend Keith Cunningham taught me this, and it's powerful that you ask yourself that question and watch what comes up. And then at the end of your thinking session, you draw a line under the last thing you wrote, and you write your 2 or 3 takeaways, and then your 2 or 3 action steps. And then you take those action steps and put them on next week's to do. So you're connecting your thinking to your actions. And and Darren, the reason this works is because when you get your week going every week, you have a lot coming at you. You're talking to people, you're learning things, but in the moment, you don't necessarily understand the significance of it. But you give your subconscious mind a couple of days to just process it and give it a venue for outputting some of this input. boy, it is such a game changer. And does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, I get it. The thinking, how can I love that question there. To ask how can I, as opposed to just all
Right.
the problems. Because I love it.
And I'll give you an example in the real estate business. I have a client up in Portland, and he's in the storage facility business. A sharp guy, and he's making a couple million a year, and he wants to go to 4 million. And he's sort of, half my clients are already making $1 million a year, and half of them aren't. And so we sit down, and I ask him. I said, Wade, why don't you figure out what moves the needle? Do a thinking session on what moves the needle. Well, he comes back to me and he says, well, I think getting properties I've already acquired, getting them finished and getting them fully leased is what moves the needle. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I'm like, let's do a thinking session together. So we start that process, and I go, Wade, tell me what your unique talent is. He says, well, I can see opportunities other people can't see in storage facilities. And I'm like, okay. And so we cogitate on that for a minute, and I go, I think what moves the needle is is getting more properties into your evaluation pipeline and focusing on that rather than getting the ones you've already bought finished. And that one idea, which was already in his head, has caused him to go to $4 million a year net now. And so that's the power of this thinking. And to help your audience do this, I got a gift I want to give you. Um, uh, and we can put it in the show notes, but the website is thinkitbeit.com. And I'm going to give you a 5-minute video that explains this in more detail, as well as a guide for this. And basically, if you'll go to thinkitbeit.com-cr, that'll welcome you from this podcast. And I think you'll see it. It's a game changer.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I appreciate you sharing both the example there and then also the material on the website. That's great.
Right. One, I got two quick stories. One sort of, I don't know, are we good on time?
Yeah, we're fine.
I'll tell you the first story and then the final story. When I was, this talks about competence, and this, like we were talking before we got on the air. I love what you're doing because you're increasing the competence of people from more wisdom. And I saw the power of this back when I was in my 30s, probably right when I was 40. I was, like I said, I was in 7 different businesses, and I own what was then the most romantic restaurant in Dallas, which I was fortunate to buy it. I didn't create it, but somebody else, they got into trouble with the IRS. I bought it, and so and this is like in 1990, and so Jerry Jones starts coming into the restaurant, and so I'm a lifelong Dallas Cowboy fan. And so I remember going when I was, just a kid, 8 or 9, to the first games in the early 60s. And so I get to know him, and he's coming in there fairly regularly. And so I'm trying to find my way. The restaurant wasn't really my full-time gig, but it was the most fun thing I was doing. And so it hits me. I'm like, I see an opportunity to buy 12% of the Cowboys. And the reason the opportunity exists is because Jerry Jones bought 80% of the Cowboys. And he bought it from Bum Bright, who owned First National Bank of Dallas, which ended up failing. And the other 20% of the Cowboys was owned by bums friends who many had pledged their ownership at the bank. And to make a long story short, 12% of the Cowboys ended up in the hands of the FDIC. So I'm like, it might be a good idea to try and buy that 12% and go and put it into uh, a shell public company. You can buy shell public companies. And the idea was that nobody had ever put a sports franchise in a public company. And so I'm like, this is interesting. So I go to the FDIC and I say, well, I want to buy the 12% of the Cowboys. And they go, you and everybody else. And of course, I didn't have the money. I mean, the 12% was going to cost $10 million. And I had a relationship with a big law firm out in LA, Milbanks Tweed. And I pitched their partners on stroking the check out of their pension plan. And so they liked the idea, and the deal would be I'd get 2% and they'd get 10%, and off we'd go. And so I start working with the FDIC, and I say, well, okay. And they made me put up a letter of credit. And I said, well, give me the partnership agreement. Well, they don't have the partnership agreement. And I'm like, well, you're not going to be able to sell this if you don't. And they drag their feet. And finally, I'm like, well, I'm going to call Jerry. So I call him and I go, Jerry, I'm going to buy that 12% of the Cowboys that the FDIC owns. I'd like to swing by this afternoon and pick up that partnership agreement. And he goes, John, I'm not going to give it to you. And I said, well, the FDIC can make you give it to me. And he goes, well, I'm betting they're incompetent. And as it turns out, I'm like, well, I'd probably play it the same way. And sort of the deal falls apart. And I'm like, well, that's a bummer. But here's what's interesting. And I realized this many years later. I never needed the partnership agreement because the interest in the Cowboys had already been vetted by the bank's attorneys when they created, when they first loaned on it. And this is the power of being a more sophisticated entrepreneur. You see what matters and what doesn't. And it really didn't matter because my pitch to the attorneys would be, hey, if there's any problems with it, you're attorneys, you'll sue him. So, but that's a long-winded way of giving you a little kudos for what you're doing, because you're making people, a little more sophisticated in how they're doing things.
No, that's awesome. The just even have the thought of that and getting so close to doing it, but then also recognizing the short-sightedness in your thinking.
Right.
I mean, because that's you put the hurdle up there as opposed to the remove the hurdle kind of thing.
Right.
And that's I know I've got plenty of those stories where I've created the hurdle. I am the hurdle, as opposed to not. So,
well, my 2% would be worth around $300 million today. So that was a big fish that got away.
No, that's awesome.
Can I share one final quick story?
Yeah.
And this, I think everybody's going to relate to this. So, I got married. I found the woman of my dreams through this methodology as well. And about 3 weeks ago, my stepdaughter has a baby, and we go over there. Ginger and I do, and we're there like the day after she has the baby, and we walk in there, and they hand me the baby, and for some reason Hannah steps away, and so does Ginger. So I'm holding this precious little baby boy that's a day old, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, wow, this baby, this person is going to live to be 100 years old, and good things are going to happen and bad things are going to happen. But what really is going to matter in this child's life is them ultimately having the courage to take control of their life. and to affect how they look at the world. Um, that's what's gonna that's what's gonna matter. And it just makes you appreciate how precious each of our lives is, and how important it is to have the courage. If your life isn't exactly what you wanted, step up and change it. And what gives me so much pleasure today is giving people a tangible way that's based on the top book in the world on success to change their life.
I love it. So true too. It's a horrible thing to waste a life.
Right,
So
right.
um, make your change and step up and make it more. So that's great. Hey, John, to wrap up here, where can listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
So just go to thinkitbeit.com, and that's our website. And for the special gift, go to thinkitbeit.com/CR. And I'm going to have a special welcome page for your guests.
Got it. John, I can't say thanks enough for taking the time to talk today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, learned a lot, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Okay, thank you for the great questions and the opportunity.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio.